Hello and welcome to the Spark of Ages podcast, where we're going to talk to founders, innovators, CEOs, investors, designers, and artists. I'm talking game changers about their big world-shaping ideas and what sparked them. I'm your host, Rajiv Parikh. I'm the CEO and founder of Position Squared, a growth marketing company based in Palo Alto, California. So yes, I'm a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, but I'm also a business news junkie and a history nerd. I'm fascinated by how big world-changing movements go from the spark of an idea to an innovation that reshapes our lives. In every episode, we're going to do a deep dive with our guest about what led them to their own eureka moments and how they're going about executing it, and perhaps most importantly, how do they get other people to believe in them so that their idea could also someday be a spark for the ages. This is the Spark of Ages podcast. It's my great pleasure today to have my close friend, Abhi Ingle, on today's Spark of Ages podcast. He's joining me here from Park City, Utah, where we're having our Growth Marketing Summit, an exclusive gathering of 30 top business and technology leaders, especially those who are close to the go-to-market and marketing world. Welcome, Abhi. So great to have you here with me.
Thanks for having me, Rajiv. Looking really forward to learning from everything that you guys have here and hopefully giving back as well.
You will definitely be giving back from what I know about you, even if we don't ask for it. So one of the great things about knowing Abhi over the years is you've always been truly curious about the world around you. And you've always been the type that takes big risks and takes chances in terms of what you do. You've worked in early stage startups, later stage startups, big, gigantic, stalwart companies, to companies that are in the middle of going public or on the edges of it. And you've scaled from working with small teams to super large teams. So I think this is super fun to talk about as in this whole segment about, or this series about innovation, because in doing all those things, you've touched innovation in so many different ways. I think one of the things that characterizes your life is flexibility. Maybe you want to talk about, how do you think about it when you go from all these different experiences?
You know, that's a good question. I've never really stepped back and thought about it, so it's a good exercise for me to do that. But I'll tell you certain aspects I've always admired about people, right? So I think it was Albert Einstein who once said that change is a measure of intelligence. The amount of ability to absorb change, I'm sure I munched the quote, right, is a measure of intelligence, which is a very non-traditional way to look at intelligence. But I believe it does drive it because you can actually be flexible but not deviate from what you're trying to do. So the way I look at it is visions can be permanent, but plans have to be tweaked. Okay, and that has served me in good stead because the reality is when you have a vision or you have a plan, you do not know what life is going to throw at you. And I think the silliest thing you can do is when opportunity walks in the room, you close the door. That's how I've looked at life, whether it is my own personal life, and we'll talk about that as well, or frankly, situations in business.
So let me go into one. So then you're at AT&T, your career's flying, you are an officer at AT&T, which is a huge achievement. I always thought you'd be the CEO of AT&T. That was my sort of like, Abhi to me is like the prototypical CEO one day, immigrant, comes here, kicks ass, rules the world as the CEO. But instead, you decided to take the plunge on a company that was doing well, that was on the verge of going public, but you jumped to that, right? From a defined path, a fairly defined path that you'd built up over 17 years, to this unique company called Qualtrics.
You know, it's an interesting point, and you know, this all happened in the pandemic, and the pandemic gave me some time to step back and think. And I could not be more grateful for AT&T. Where else would you get the chance to start up 3 different billion-dollar businesses? The IoT business, the mobile data business, what we now call the FirstNet business. But at the same time, there was a hunger because I'd been in the same industry for a long period of time. And the company had gotten really big, 250, 300,000 people.
Yeah.
And nothing about the company, it was my own personal desire to go and make neuro change happen and learn. And that's what keeps me alive, keeps me fresh, is when I'm learning, when I'm challenged, when I'm pushed in a situation where I have to think on the fly. And I was looking for something smaller that had a huge growth potential and a massive total available market. And that also personally appealed to me. And one of the things I've been noticing was that experiences mattered more and more. While we spent all of this time trying to distinguish ourselves on features and functionality and speeds and feeds. The reality was, to a consumer who wasn't knowledgeable, it all kind of looked the same.
Yeah.
And we wanted to get into creating experiences, and then Qualtrics comes along. They're the lead in the experience management space, okay? And they're about to go public. When I understood that this wasn't just about surveys.
This wasn't a survey company.
It wasn't a survey company.
We see it as a survey thing. You know, you fly United or you fly some airline and you get something back that says, and it's a Qualtrics survey, you'll see that, and it says, you know, how rate your experience 1 to 10. You're like, oh, that's easy to do. How did a company like that become something that could actually go public, get to such heights? But you saw it differently. Yeah. And I'm sure they saw it differently too. These guys were smart folks.
Well, it's interesting, when I was talking to them, I actually challenged them about this situation. And that's always a good lesson when you challenge them. How do they respond? Do they respond angrily, or do they tell you, let me educate you on how we see the market? And it was a master class in being educated in terms of how they saw the market differently than all the other dozens of, what I'll just say, small feedback survey companies that had followed in their wake, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't see this. They found this as a way to make business more human. Because being human is about being able to listen, understand, empathize, and allow somebody to state a point of view. And that's how Qualtrics built their system. So today what Qualtrics does is it allows you to deeply tune into a customer. What you're asking them, what we call solicited information, what they're doing digitally, observation, and then what is unsolicited. What are they doing when they call to the call center, when they're posting on social? So we pull all of this information into one longitudinal record that we call experience ID. So in essence, we allow a company to understand the longitudinal record of all the experiences a customer has had with them over time. That combined with the company's operational data and our massive database allows us to say, what is the most likely thing that will happen? And then we make you close the loop. If somebody had a bad experience, follow up with them and close the loop.
So a simple example would be, I'm sitting there on my airline, and the airline asks me, about my experience. And as it digs in with questions, they realize that I feel uncertain about where my bags are. I'm sitting on the plane, I'm fretting where are my bags, and then all of a sudden, over time, probably as a result, I would say definitely as a result of looking at the data that they put into the system, the way people feel when they call the call center, hey, where's my bag? I don't know what it is, and probably realizing that when people don't feel uncertain, they probably ran surveys of like, well, instead of you doing a carry-on, if you felt certain that your bag was truly on the plane, maybe you wouldn't do that carry-on and take up all that space and give it to those who only need it from an essential point of view, and I could speed up the time that you get on a plane. So that all that data together then comes into an app that says, it's tracking your bag. And now you're like, oh God, I gave my bag to them. It told me they got my bag. It's on the plane. I get off the plane, it's delivering it to the carousel, right? Is that some of the insight that you can pull together from all these experiences?
Absolutely, Rajiv. You've given a great example of what I say is an evolved form of experience management. People think experience management is about surveys and getting the results. The reality is it's not. It's about understanding your customers really deeply and then closing the loop. And there are two types of closing the loop, and I'll borrow shamelessly from the Bain theory on this topic, the concept of NPS. One is the inner loop, which is Rajiv has a bad experience. I personally reach out to Rajiv, make sure his bad experience is closed. Then there's the category of problem that got Rajiv into the problem and is affecting hundreds, maybe millions of other people, that you go and fix structure. That's an outer loop change. And what our software is set up to do is that this ingestion engine, which understands and helps you deeply tune in to customers and also, by the way, employees, okay? Then it tells you what an experience record and tells you what's going to happen. And then we have workflow integrations into every system of record, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Slack, email, where we close the loop. That action orientation is what matters more than the absolute score.
So now you can see when I have my United app up and it shows now up on my, it's like that smart display at the top, and it tells me how many seconds before my flight I landed. It tells me that my bag's been delivered. That's all part of that system. So they've given Qualtrics access to all these systems.
So I'll give the example of Delta, right? We've worked very closely with them, and Ed Bastian has been on record talking about this, so I can actually talk about it, right? But one of the most disruptive elements of what happens in the airlines is a service disruption. And if you think about it, airlines is a tough business. Three of the most important factors, the weather, the airports, are not within the control of airlines. And by the equipment they use, For the most part, every airline uses the same two pieces of equipment.
Remember in business school, they made us study airlines all the time because it was the closest thing to perfect competition.
Correct.
And
Correct.
other than Southwest, it was considered a pretty crappy business.
Correct. But Delta has really reinvented their business.
Right.
If you really take and Ed, this is top down, from the top, he led this, but they've got understanding and listening to the customers so deeply embedded, both in their digital app, in their internal systems, and frankly, they have the information on each of the staff members' elements either. So when somebody comes in like you, who might be a top level flyer, and walks in and they know that you've missed your last two connections, you might have somebody come over and give you a handwritten note that says, Mr. Parikh, we're so sorry you missed your last two connections. I've gone ahead and taken a look. Your next connection should take only about 10 minutes to walk over. We're supposed to land with 30 minutes to spare. If there's a problem, I'll personally walk you over. Now, you can't do that, by the way, for everybody.
Right.
Let's say you're a Delta Diamond, and I'm just an ordinary Delta flyer. I might get a simple thing saying, we're so sorry you missed your flights. We've gone ahead and credited a
your
coupon
account,
into
right?
your digital wallet. Your next drink is on
So
us.
nailing it before you have a problem,
Correct.
right? Progressive Insurance would talk about it. When, if an incident occurs, they know that by getting to you right away, personally,
100%.
that you're less likely to file a bigger claim later, plus you're going to be a lot happier.
That is correct. And if you think about what I just emphasized,
Yeah.
it's very easy to be empathetic one-on-one.
Yes.
Okay? What we do through our system is we provide the ability to provide empathy at scale, listening at scale, and then the abstraction of that into actions that you can take to improve your processes, and also a data record which tells you what are the things that piss people off. Now, if you're not using that to improve your product development, as you started mentioning,
Right.
airlines are doing, or if you're not doing that, let's say in car dealerships,
Right.
to actually improve the way you deliver service, that's on you.
That's on you. But you're providing all the tools. And to your point, Delta, I remember going to an Ad Age event where they said, we are going to, we know how we're considered one of the poorest areas for buyer affection or customer love. And we aim to change that. We're going to be one of the top 5 brands. So it's amazing that they've turned that desire to not just pretty colors and pretty slogans, but actually to action.
Delta lives it top down. I've seen it firsthand. I could not be prouder to fly Delta these days because they are really setting the tone for what kind of service an American airline can provide.
We need them to build a bigger hub in San Francisco. So now let's talk about, you were at McKinsey, right?
Yep.
Post getting a degree in computer science and mathematics. So you went down this pseudo-traditional path, right, where you learned the technology, but then you worked as an analyst at McKinsey, and then you went to Harvard Business School, so you're on a nice, path. A good Indian son would do that. A good non-doctor Indian son would do that. And then you went back to McKinsey. Of course, I'm sure it helped pay for business school and get you lots of other experiences at executive levels and change levels in terms of how people are changing companies. But then you went to a startup, right? And then you went to AT&T, where you built a $3 billion business over 17 years. So you did the startup thing, you did the big company thing, you worked with big companies at McKinsey, then you went to AT&T. Why would you go to an old stalwart, stodgy, fixed phone line type of company?
So I think, you have to step back from this and think of the common thread that ties us all together, right? So yes, I did serve large companies at McKinsey. It was important for me because I did not have, before business school, a formal business education. I was computer science and math. I was all-round geek. And I'm proud of it too, by the way.
Good math boy.
I'm
Super
good math and
star.
computer science guy. I coded since I was in the 5th grade, and I'm proud of it. I hide nothing from that perspective. But I knew I needed to understand how to speak the language of business to be able to communicate my thoughts and to achieve greater impact. Actually, one of my last assignments at McKinsey was one of the very first 4 equity studies we did. And I got really excited about the hands-on work I was doing, but it wasn't a traditional study. Okay, and this company eventually was acquired by Amazon for $300 million, a company called Zhongli.
Oh,
Okay?
that's right.
And
So you were working with a startup.
exactly. And I realized at the end of that much as I loved McKinsey, the firm, at some point I was only going to be advising. And I felt the itch to operate. Okay, I felt the itch to operate, and 1999, 2000 in the Bay Area was like being in the Renaissance and not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
So I jumped out to a startup I was passionate about. The company was Covad. We were bidding fit to completely change.
Our good common friend, Rich Wong.
Exactly.
Who
Rich.
Every time we'd sit together, would be selling you on joining.
That's right. That's exactly right. Rich and I worked together at McKinsey, and he pulled me into Covad. He was the head of marketing and products, and I came in as head of new products.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing experience. And the kind of change we unleashed, we forced every incumbent to move. So I measure that from the perspective of what did you actually have impact on. It's not the prestige of the work you're working on or the perception of the company, but what did you actually achieve and how did that align with your overall objective, right? Similarly, I actually left Covad after the regulations changed and it squashed the growth of the company. But in the course of doing Covad, we realized that we had built a really powerful distributed software system which really controlled our business.
Right. It wasn't just a pure, this was part of the broadband network revolution, right?
That's right.
Back then we were going from these slow modems
Correct.
to high speed access for businesses for Covad.
Correct. And the only reason we tangled and were able to play with big behemoths, which ironically ended up working for later on, was because we had a software system that controlled the entire process of provisioning, setting up, and automating the process of setting these high-speed connections up. So I left with the head of software engineering to create a software company which showed visibility. Think of it as a pre-cloud cloud infrastructure company right in the middle of the worst nuclear winter that the Valley has seen.
That's right.
That, by the way, is a good experience. 2000. Let's just say that we actually ended up selling our company to IBM, but it wasn't a great exit. After which I stepped back and said, I love driving change. What company and platform gives me the greatest ability to drive change? Okay, and a company that was in Seattle, this is pre it being AT&T per se, came to us and said, hey, I need somebody from the Valley who understands software, who understands technology and business to come in and build a business where data matters to businesses. That's what made me jump.
That was McCaw Cellular, right?
That was McCaw, which became AT&T, which then got by Singular, which then got by SBC, which then merged with AT&T. So it wasn't AT&T for 15, 17 years. It was four different companies.
You didn't say, oh, I'm going to join AT&T. I'm dying to join this.
Correct.
At one point, AT&T was built out of New Jersey, right? Basking Ridge, New Jersey. But this was the different AT&T. This was the AT&T name that went over to SBC, right?
Yes.
Former SBC, Whitaker, he did all these acquisitions and put these companies together. And then they realized that the fixed landline business will eventually potentially transition. But then they went and got McCaw Cellular, which was there were two different ways of buying cellular frequency, and they were the ones that did it the independent way and built their own network. So you were actually part of a pretty innovative culture in joining that company when you went there.
We've made a really interesting point that, you're going from a small company, super innovative, to large, stodgy companies. I want you to step back and think about, in any company, small or large, there's innovation and there's opportunity if you can recognize it. Okay? But to do that requires, again, embracing change and being flexible. I'll just give you one example from within that company. We went in, the cellular data revolution was in full flow, and I realized that our device certification group was rejecting a series of devices. And I couldn't understand it. They would come to me for exceptions. And I went deep into those and I realized there's a whole new class of devices which were not phones, were not classic devices, but people were embedding literally almost illegally cellular connectivity into physical objects to be able to understand the state of that object. And I suddenly realized this is not
What's an example?
Wrong. So what's an example? Example is the UPS tablets.
Right.
Okay, UPS tablets needed connectivity on the fly. That's not a phone.
Right.
But we used to put everything for phone test. How does it sound when you hold it to your ear?
Right.
We would require you to come into this store to actually activate it.
Which makes no sense.
It makes no sense for a device of that sort. Or things that went into, frankly, waste oil bins. Is the oil full? Send me a sensor. Dispatch somebody to empty the oil. The vending machine empty? Send somebody to send it out.
Completely different requirements.
Completely different requirements. So we built an entirely different system for handling these types of devices, which then came to be known as Internet of Things devices. This was the IoT platform. We started that from scratch, okay, in the year 2004.
Because you guys noticed noticed how people were using these devices.
Exactly. In that difficulty, we noticed there was opportunity. It did not jive with our current business practices. The easy answer was to reject it. Instead, we looked at it, we realized it was a new business, and we actually built upon it. That business today is a multi-billion-dollar business for AT&T with over 100 million connected devices.
So when you were there at AT&T, after that, post that acquisition, that was what you ended up doing, right?
That was part of the
Working on
remit.
business devices
Exactly.
for AT&T.
Correct.
In probably in one of the most dynamic and innovative areas of the company.
Correct.
You became a magnet for the innovative capabilities of companies everywhere you went.
Correct. And if you really think about it, Rajiv, right, that idea, once we got that idea and we were able to build this business, gives a lot of confidence. Then we realized if we just watch what our customers did with the new smartphones, with the new tablets that were coming out, we realized that these were people who were doing mobile work. Well, if they're doing mobile work, well, why won't we have a forms application? Remember when people used to walk around with clipboards and forms? We had a big slogan which said clipboard with a big red X through it, and we'd have a forms application served out of the cloud on a mobile tablet.
Before cloud was a cloud.
Before cloud was cloud.
Right.
And that's why we formed early partnerships with companies that did mobile device management like Mobile Iron, AirWatch, and we had forms applications from companies who were supplying forms who partnered with Box.
And all those companies were companies that weren't even around.
They were all just starting out.
Mobile Iron was what we had Tehi Nam on our podcast.
Yeah.
That was one of the companies that he loves to highlight that they funded. And they talk about how they were so innovative because they saw something that other people didn't see.
Exactly.
So, but they needed a partner to enable them to get there.
Exactly. And Tehi Nam, Bob Tinker, Ajay, who were the founders, are dear friends now, all these days later, because at one point we took the risk to take into market. They needed, at one point, we were 25 to 30% of their channel sales. I had the privileges of being on the NASDAQ when they invited me for the IPO, right? We gave voice to startups in Toronto, which did telematics, right? Fleet management tracking. 20 years later, I sit on their board.
So now that's something that's on the business side, right?
Correct.
Which is where you're primarily focused.
Correct.
But that also, because of the business application, the business is always willing to pay more, right? Because they have a particular need that they can establish a return on investment on. But that eventually bled over into consumer devices as well. Or do you find that was happening at the same time?
It actually started the other way in some ways, right? The consumer side started first because if you recall, that same company in Seattle was the company that sponsored American Idol, if you can think back to way back then. And we actually taught Americans how to text. Believe it or not, at that point in time, Americans didn't text. And that's what got America into texting. So texting revenues were actually the big data driver, but they didn't play that well in business. So on the business side, we had to come up with analogs for that. So we had business productivity email, remember BlackBerry, or the trio with good email. So those were all solutions that we assembled to make this thing happen. So we thought about these as mobile cloud connected devices where you could do your jobs on the flow. And we had to actually go into companies and teach them, here's your process before mobile. We would do literally a series of process steps. We would cut a whole bunch of them out and say, this is your process after mobile. Who wouldn't want a field worker to go out and be able to do 20% more, and when they come home, they don't have to type in all the orders, they've done it on the fly.
So in a way, in this form of revolution, a lot of times it's the more expensive usage is what drives the cost down for a particular innovation or network usage. In this case, it actually went the other way, right? Because they were texting on American Idol, they had texting. Texting was a thing in Europe. Actually, more
texting was a thing in Europe. We taught America how to text.
Taught America how to text. AT&T at the time was the primary sponsor for American Idol.
That's right.
And as part of that brand integration, I love marketing as you know, they decided to combine those things together and popularize a capability that's driven the whole industry.
And we made AT&T synonymous with this new way in which you use phones. And we did the same thing on business. You'll notice we didn't sell technology into business. We sold them solutions to solve problems. You have a fast food restaurant, they're dispatching somebody every day who makes a round of all the restaurants to empty the oil, the cooking oil wastage. Why would you do that? We'll put a sensor in there. We'll send you a signal saying that oil is full. And oh, by the way, we can now locate who's the nearest truck driver and dispatch them there.
So would you say that in this case, it was because a company's enterprise needs tend to be focused more on reliability and making sure things work at scale? In a way, it was lagging the consumer use. And you can take it to today with what's going on with AI, right? And generative AI, and all of us, how involved we are with ChatGPT. We're okay with hallucinations for consumer use, but to get it to business today, that same generative AI has to be more reliable, so business may actually lag.
It's a great analogy, and it's a good lesson to all of us that history tends to repeat itself. Okay, we didn't create new processes. We changed the process that existed to inject in real-time information and real-time location. Right. Similarly, what AI is going to do is literally inject in real-time assistance, real-time solutions that change the workflow process to be far more efficient. And oh, by the way, in both situations, what makes the difference is real-time data. Data is king in both of these scenarios.
Data is king in both
If
scenarios.
you can empower people with the data at the point at which they're going to take action, you have created tremendous value.
If you were to sum up your experiences in these companies and kind of how you went through all this, what would you sum it up as?
I like to think of myself as a builder,
Yeah.
and a pace setter, okay, in terms of what I do. Because when I go in and I see an opportunity, the idea is, how do you build and get a group of people to get excited about that opportunity, okay, and then build it at speed to get something that will actually result in a real business, right? And in that situation, you paint a vision of that city on the hill that you're all marching towards, okay, and the actual plans to go there, honestly, are going to change every year. It's pretty interesting. I get calls from kids who are just graduated from business school. And they're like, what was your 15-year plan? Or when you get interviewed, they say, what's your 5-year plan?
But you did have one.
I always have had a 5-year plan, but my 5-year plan gets revised every year.
That's right.
Okay, that's why I say the vision can be fixed, but your plans have to be flexible. If you're not taking in the input of what presents itself, you're really missing the dynamic, changing world that we live in.
Be willing to change, be open to change as you drive towards a larger vision.
Correct, and it's okay to take another path if you see an option that you didn't know of before, right? And that, by the way, applies to my personal life as well. So
awesome. So would you characterize that as what got you there won't get you?
What got you here won't get you there. Nice. Look, I mean, it's 100% true. That was true for my personal life. If I look at the story of Qualtrics, right, which I'm so proud of the company I'm at right now, they started off as a research enterprise survey feedback company. They pivoted that into an experience management company, and we got an even larger vision right now, which is making business more human. As the company grew, as they realized what people were using that research product for, they created custom-built customer experience projects, employee experience products. If they had just stayed an enterprise survey company, where would this company be today? Died. Huge kudos to Ryan Smith, Zig Serafin, Jared Smith, and all the people who came in and built this company to what it is right now.
Be part of it, so that's awesome.
Amazing, and I'm just privileged to have become a part of it. Right?
Awesome. Abhi, you talked about how that flexibility in how you work in business, the desire to build businesses with innovation and having a plan, but revising the plan. And so that's what you do in business. Is that what you do in your personal life as well?
I actually did in my personal life, and I took that philosophy over into business, a better way to think about it.
Yeah.
And honestly, it wasn't planned, it happened, and then I made it a habit, okay? I just started my life, like my parents. I grew up in Mumbai, India. My parents were both doctors. They're both prominent doctors in India. My sister was going into medicine. We owned a clinic in Mumbai, okay? The natural thing for the good Indian son to do would have been a doctor.
Be a doctor.
Okay?
You might even start up a hospital.
That's right. And I was good in all the sciences, as was required for a kid from that household. But I was very lucky to have parents who did not actually rigidly tie me into that. In fact, my mom enrolled me for a summer course in this new thing called computers and coding. In my 5th grade summer, I was horrified. 4-5 hours a day, 4 days a week in the summer, Mom? I'm not doing this.
And why would your mom want to put you in that?
Because my mom and my dad grew up really poor, and we were solidly middle class, and they wanted us to have all the things that they didn't have.
Yeah.
So literally my mom would come back every week with a new idea. I read about this new thing called oceanography. I would be interested. I'm like, Mom, for God's sake. So she said, look, I already paid for the course. Why don't you go for the first week?
Well, they got you on the paying for the course.
Put it this way. I went there and I fell in love.
Yeah.
I just took to coding like a duck to water and just loved it. I had a couple of really great friends, and while we were in high school itself, come 8th and 9th grade, we were selling commercial software.
Amazing.
At that point in time, the course of my life changed because I was thinking at some point in the future, I'll probably go to a great engineering school in India. I'll go overseas to America for graduate school.
Go and get into IIT.
Exactly. But at that point, I realized that, I probably should get a good grounding in India. And slow and behold, everything changed. That's what my parents wanted. They were hoping I could go to school in India, maybe even get married before I go off to the US, right?
Find you a good girl.
Exactly right. But then I also used to be the captain of the quiz bowl team. And in a quizzing competition that we had, we won the tournament, and we were at the Bombay Natural History Society. A gentleman in the front row approaches me. He's from the United States Educational Foundation, India, and said, "Young man, have you ever thought about studying in the United States?" I said, "Well, for graduate school." He's like, "No, for undergrad." I said, "I can't afford it." He says, "There's no scholarships for undergrad." He's like, "There are in a few select places." Here's my card. I sat on the card for 3 weeks, tortured with these thoughts. Finally gave him a call, went down there, looked at the campus, looked at the arrays of computers lying there, waiting for me. And I went and talked to my parents and said, "Nope, too young, too impressionable, don't do this."
Right.
And I said, "Mom, Dad, you never said no."
And by the way, it's a natural thing back then too, and back then and even today, to believe your child is there's a whole different maturity to leaving home, leaving country, going to a new culture, knowing that your kid's going to be just fine in that. I mean, that's a natural.
Trust me, Raji, they were right, because I got to tell you, I was pampered.
Yeah.
Okay, growing up in a middle class Indian household.
You can live pretty well.
You can live pretty darn well. I had a cook. I had a driver. We had somebody who washed. I don't think I even washed a plate in my life. So I was book smart and practically useless. Okay, just putting it out there, right?
Right. Whereas in America, you got to do everything.
And oh, by the way, I had never even been to the U.S. as a tourist.
That's true.
Okay, I was 18 years old. So finally they relented and said, "Okay, fine. If you get a full scholarship, you can go." They regretted that, because 2 months later I showed up with a full scholarship from Oberlin College in Ohio.
Amazing.
And they were freaked out, but they held good to their word. And I landed there, never having been visited before.
In a way, your mom got what she wanted, right? She kept driving you towards the next great thing, or
That's
whatever is potentially interested, or she was just looking for something that would drive you, that would spark you.
Yes, and she sparked me. I'll tell you that. I think some of the sparks burnt her, because she had a worse fear come true, which was her son leave the house at age 18.
Yeah, which is hard.
But as I said, I owe so much to my parents, because had they not set up that culture of constantly wanting to do something new, learning, I'll tell you, the most important thing they taught me was striving and constantly being a learner. And with that came change and flexibility and the ability to adapt.
Was it them pushing you, or was it you watching them in terms of what they did?
I grew up in an intergenerational household. So we grew up in a joint Indian family. So my parents lived with us. And their stories inspired me. My maternal grandfather was orphaned at the age of 6 in the Black Plague in India. And he had to be first every year when his relatives took him in, because there was one scholarship.
Yeah.
One scholarship. So if you know sort of old high caste Indians, they had this little knot at the top of their head. He would tie that to a light. So if he fell asleep, he would wake him up and he would study all night so he could be first every year. Because that is his only hope. My paternal grandfather came up from a village. There was no electricity in his house. He would walk a mile to sit under the highway where the lights were to study. That inspired me. They sold everything to set my parents up. My parents put all of their money into education and the values that we got. And in 3 generations, education and that striving for improving yourself has gotten us to where we are.
So you got that amazing example in front of you. Did they put it in your face and push you? Or they just watched you as you went? Because look, this happens a lot in immigrant families, which drives sometimes kids to anxiety, right? Or it pushes them so hard they're pushed to the edge, and a lot of us deal with that as parents of kids who feel that pressure. But was it more like, okay, here's the example around me, I have that feeling of being driven, or were they on you?
Raji, that's a great question, because look, I'm not unfamiliar with the concept of the Asian tiger parents, right? Of which Indians are a big contributing factor. Let's just be honest about it.
Of course.
Stereotypes come for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Those were not my parents. And I was very fortunate, because I had friends who were suffering.
Yeah.
And my parents never really pushed me. They laid out what was possible. They said this is what is possible. And I knew that if I didn't do well, they would be disappointed. And just the act of watching them conduct their lives okay,
So the
was an
example was
inspiration
the
to me.
driver.
The example of my grandparents
Yep.
in the same room as me. I shared a
Right.
room with my paternal grandfather.
Wow.
So the funny thing is, he actually was in a British firm. That's why my English is far better than my parents' English. When my parents went to school in independent India and studied in the native languages out
Right.
there, my grandfather was fluent in English. My paternal grandfather was an engineer, so my math comes from him.
Right.
So a lot of who I am was shaped by the intergenerational family experience I grew up in. It also taught me to be empathetic and tolerant of differences. It's a lot of things to have to be living with 3 generations in the same house, especially when you share a room with your grandfather.
That's amazing. I never knew that you did that. And so you had that active encouragement, you had that active respect for your elders.
Yes.
You built empathy for what they did. It helped translate to your ability to speak really well. I know I know a lot of folks from India that come from English standard schools, but your English is impeccable.
Thank you.
Even beyond that. So, and it's because you care so much about all these things, right? That you have this desire to be precise as well as be open to change. Like you talked about how you took that computer science course as a kid. Was that, would you characterize that as your spark moment, your eureka moment, that all these things were possible? Was there a moment, or was it a series of
There's
things?
a series of moments where I would say there are decisions that you make that shape your life. The decision my mom made for me with that course exposed an array of opportunity to me. The ability to then go and exercise in the United States was a very big decision that I could not have taken with the support of my parents, and frankly, from the people from the college who put a bet on this kid from Mumbai who went to a public school. What made them do that? I have no idea. Similarly, going to school, sophomore year, we started up a software company.
Yeah.
I realized immediately that the stereotype for Indians were backroom guys who are going to write the code. I wanted to be exposed to business. Oberlin's Career Center said, hey, have you thought about these different professions? That's when I ran into McKinsey. So I look at this as a series of opportunities that presented itself with decisions. And the other thing I found is people who had no need or necessity to help me came out of their way to do extraordinary acts of kindness. The director of the United States Educational Foundation in India, he saw me once. The head of the Career Center at Oberlin, he saw me once. The first person at McKinsey who finally made the offer to me, who didn't know anything about business, while everybody in that room interviewing, I still remember to this day, had Michael Porter's competitive strategy set out in front of them, and I had never taken any business. And they all laughed at me saying, you haven't read this book? Boy, that's going to be a tough interview. They saw something in me which was the problem solving, the desire, the passion. And for those people, I'm always grateful, and I like to pay that forward, frankly. So if you look at what I do personally,
I know that's what you
I pay
do
it
all
forward.
the time. You definitely do it all the time. And I'd say from that experience, right, you have this experience of how your family's encouraging, giving you the opportunity to take risks. There's a series of events that unfold where people are helping you. So you have this mindset that people are actually out there to help you. And that's some of it too, right? Like you could be a person that's like, no, people are looking to beat me up. And you could always take a defensive crouch when they're suggesting to do things. You took it as a way of helping you. Like, is there any like historical leader or technology or innovation that just got you, that inspired you? I'm sure there's a dozen, so you have to pick one or two.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just say that I am profoundly grateful for having lived through the change that we saw with personal computers in my childhood, to then the internet as I was graduating, okay, to the smartphone era that I got to ride, to what we're going through right now with SaaS, with generative AI. And all I can tell people is embrace that change, enjoy that change, harness that change, and take joy in that change and help people adapt to that change, because to me, that frankly is what defines a human being. That's what defines the world we live in. And I think we are constant pieces of work, even when I sort of think of myself in old age, and I think of myself when I might not actually have an operating career anymore. I like to learn.
Yeah, it's super fun to learn, right? It's always something new to get to go and drive forward and to
The
push
other thing is
yourself towards.
mindset, Rajiv, right?
Yeah.
So I have a very
let me-
optimistic
so let me,
perspective.
Let me just say, so you have a very optimistic perspective. Otherwise, you wouldn't see these as openings, right? So now a number of people who listen to our podcast, Spark of Ages, are based in India. What advice would you give them about their career next? A lot of them may want to come to the US, but now India's booming on its own, so many of those top-notch folks may not need to come to the US, right? India has changed fundamentally. Right? India opened up in 1990, right? It went from a semi-socialistic state or heavily government-regulated state to a much more open country for innovation and entrepreneurship. How would you advise them today?
For me, have a vision for what you want to do, but keep your plans flexible. I'll come back to where I started off.
Yeah.
And I think India right now specifically is in the middle of a multi-generational renaissance that has kicked off. I'll tell you my own story. I'm now angel invested in 2 companies in India. This is not just because I want to do good and go back and help people, but because I believe the options are so profound. And the people I'm meeting, the talent I'm seeing, frankly, in your own company, Position Squared, is second to none. And the beauty is you can do it now being where you are without having to rip yourself out of your culture, okay? And you can achieve success in your own terms, in your own country, as part of your culture. Now, I encourage all of you to experiment. If your part of your change is to go overseas, it doesn't need to be the US, it could be Germany, it could be France, it could be anywhere. Do it, try it. That experience, regardless whether it succeeds immediately or not, is going to change you for life. And that is a portion of who you are. All of that I've done, my journeys, my changes, my experiments, my failures are who make me who I am today. And I'm at peace with that.
That's awesome.
Okay.
So now, you've offered great advice to the youth of tomorrow, or even those who are listening today. They could be in their midlife and they can make change, right? You've met some people at this event that made their life change at 50 or 55. You've had this amazing career. It's not done by any means. You've got a long way to go. Even if you think you've ended it, you're never going to stop. So if you were to put yourself in a parallel universe, right, that you could do something completely different. It could be writing a book, it could be acting, it could be anything. Not worrying about the path you're on, you're always willing to change, but you did build based on a certain path and your options get built based on that. How would you think about it? Would you actually do something completely different in that parallel universe? Is there something that says to you, I gotta try something? That would have been cool to do.
You know, Rajiv, it's a really interesting question to ask because I believe there are multiple paths to happiness.
Yeah.
Okay, there is not one path to happiness. You know, part of what people not know about me is I traveled a lot when I was young. I backpacked across Africa, Southeast Asia, South America, obviously Europe, okay? I've climbed Kilimanjaro, Base Camp Everest, done the Inca Trail.
At different ages.
Gone to the Alps at different ages.
You didn't do this as just a teenager
Nope.
or a high school kid or college kid.
All the way through.
You're doing this all the way through.
And when I travel, I don't like to just stay in fancy places. I'm out.
You went to Everest with your son.
Yes.
To base camp,
Yes.
right? With your 15-year-old son.
Correct. And to me, I could see a parallel life in which I was a bum with a backpack, just traveling around the world, taking in all these new experiences, learning from people, and maybe just be a tour guide. And yes, my net worth would probably be 100th of what it is right now, but you know what? The spiritual satisfaction I would get from that would be very similar. And, you know, fundamentally, I look at, you know, so much of what you do is your mindset. I have a naturally optimistic mindset. My wife makes fun of me. You know her. She's a bit of a worrier. And she literally gave me this t-shirt for my last birthday which said glass half full.
Yeah.
Okay. And I like to I like to think of this as there is so much you can do. It's what makes you happy. And as your life changes, right? One of the things I've been really reading is a lot of books by Arthur Brooks now. And the theory of, you know, what I'll call
happiness.
fluid versus crystallized. What is happiness? And I'm finding that my own drivers are changing. I get so much more fun just knowing that this accumulated wisdom I have. 25 minutes with an entrepreneur starting off can change their life. Or someone with a mid-journey saying, let me tell you all the things I did wrong, so you don't make them. Or, you know, they're weighing off options. And there's so much joy in that giving back.
Right.
And I also look at it as a way to honor all of those who helped me when they didn't need to, when I was nobody. And I look at that as paying back. Similarly, if you look at the access I got, a lot of my charitable giving back goes back to literacy for kids in India, literacy
you
for
can
children in
transform
India.
a life, yeah.
That's right. My daughter went back and volunteered at an organization in India called Pratham, and she served for 2 weeks in Aurangabad at the PACE Center, which, by the way, ironically is only about 50, 60 miles from when my dad was born.
Nice.
So we go full cycle.
So everybody keeps going with
Full
that.
cycle. I believe, in the Indian concept of karma.
Well, I would say in your wife's defense, since I know her and love her, Molly, my wife does the same thing because she considers me overly optimistic. I think sometimes they take the half glass empty to balance us out.
Yes.
Because I think they might have been optimistic. They might
That's
have been
right.
a little more had we not been so optimistic. They're a wonderful balancing force.
I'm glad you brought that up because, I will tell you that in every journey, what matters is the people who you take along.
Yeah.
And I would not be where I am without my parents, my grandparents, and the people who helped me. And of course, my wife, who has had to endure me for almost 25 years of my life. And for that, I'm deeply grateful. I couldn't do what I do without her.
She's awesome.
I couldn't be the carefree optimist if I wasn't, knowing that she was worrying about everything else.
One of the lucky things I got to do early in my career, post-business school, was because I knew you, I got to know Molly, and Molly joined me as my head of corporate marketing when I was at Alta Vista, and she's just a rock star, and still is a rock star.
And I ended up hiring your brother-in-law to
There
come
you go.
work for me at Covad.
I think I got the better deal of trade, although I think both did extremely well.
They both did great.
And both of them got an amazing experience, and they would have done it anyways, but
Yes.
I think we had a little part in it. I know you had a life motto from Albert Einstein earlier. Do you have a favorite life motto that comes back to you over and over, something that repeats in the back of your head all the time?
I want to embrace life for all that it has to offer, both now and in the future. I think I'm one of those people that, hopefully, at some point when, you're no longer here, you say he did everything that he could get his hands on.
Strong legacy. But is there something that when you get up in the morning, 2 or 3 words that pop into your head?
Make it happen. Go try it out.
So you wake up in the morning and it's like, I gotta make shit happen.
I got to make happen. And this drives my family crazy, but if you're on a vacation, I'm the guy who's like, here's the 7 things we're going to get done today. And we're going to see all of these things to the point where we're in Thailand and like my friends are like, Abhi, we are watted out. No more. But I learned to moderate that too.
I'm sure you learned that too. I had the same thing, and I'm definitely learning to chill out. And so now in the morning and when I'm on vacation, it's chill out, chill out, chill out. So, but yes, for me, it's get up.
Get going.
Get going, baby. Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Abhi. I think in your career, you've done so many interesting things, and I see how it came from the amazing example of your parents, the boldness of your parents. They might have been physician middle-class folks, but there's a boldness in them that led them to enable you to try different things. And because of their positive attitude, you might have been born with it, but I think you grew up with it. And it enabled you to go really far and make a difference in the world. So I really appreciate it. I love the depth of your thinking.
Thank you for having me.
So
Thank you for having me. I'm grateful for everybody who at some point in their life has taken a chance on me. And I hope that I can pay that forward to people. Thank you.
So Abhi, we're sitting here in Park City, beautiful place. It's snowing outside. We're about to go skiing. You're in day 3 of the conference. You're actually going to be speaking later today to this illustrious group of 30 growth marketing leaders and GTM leaders, innovators. What are a couple takeaways that you have from the sessions so far and the conference so far and the people?
So Rajiv, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me here. As you probably picked up from me, learning is my thing. And being a chance to be surrounded by 30 go-to-market leaders from whom I can learn, take some of those learning back to Qualtrics and also share with them what we've done right at Qualtrics and frankly some of the mishaps we've had along the way. That's how you get better. You exchange ideas openly and you've created an amazing atmosphere out here, okay? And the way frankly you've taken your own firm, Position Squared, and blended, an Indian delivery team with a US delivery team, it doesn't feel like there's any seam at all. So yesterday, listening to Avnish talk about partnerships and ecosystem was invaluable. The guy who built it at Salesforce, ServiceNow, sits on the board of directors of HubSpot, or then listening to Ankur talk about how you capitalize that in the Amazon marketplace, which by the way, Qualtrics is leveraging very well.
Crushing.
I want to go back right now to Qualtrics and tell them about a few other things I learned from Ankur that I want us to be able to use, right? And then pragmatically listening to Neil talk about Cohere. We are also incorporating AI into all of our products and services, but listening to about what works versus not. That's true learning I can take back. And I'm hoping as I talk about Qualtrics, that some of the people out here are going to want to be able to buy Qualtrics products. So it's learning, it's commerce, it's helping each other out and having fun along the way. What could be better? Thank you for having me.
Nothing I can think of. It's a thrill to have you here.